What if I told you we had a chance to stop black violence in its tracks? What if I told you that we can do something so amazing and so incredible that it will change our lives forever? Tonight on Dark Matter Radio, we're going to discuss that very fact. There's been an awakening. Have you felt it? You are listening to Dark Matter Radio with your host, Ronnie. Europe, Asia Minor, Russia, down there in Australia, and all the way across the beautiful country of Canada, where I am a citizen of. I do appreciate that. I'm a North American citizen. That's what I call myself. Down in Mexico, the United States, again, with all of the things we're going to be talking about tonight, it is important for everyone on the planet to have an understanding of what is going on with stopping the black violence in its tracks. How can that be done? How can that be done in a way as to where it is real and true? And, you know, some of the questions we do have to ask, why hasn't it been done? And we have tackled a lot of those things on this program, Dark Matter Radio. And if you're listening on YouTube, please click like and subscribe, and also share the video. And let's get as many subscribers as we can, because we're up to about almost 2,000 people, which is really good, since we've been trying to hammer on that for the past 6 months or whatever. It's been going really well. We were up to about 3,000 at one point in time, and then went all the way down to 1,700. Not exactly sure what happened, but things happen like that on YouTube. But on Dark Matter Radio, we get into all those different types of things. And again, we're going to be advocating for different programs that teach our people and teach the people all different types of things, because we need to have a true understanding of what our history is, and we need to also support our businesses out there. One of them is Discount Paper Supply, discount-paper-supply, and everythingsolar.com. Get on there, take a look at that. I'll try to have a link in the description for that on Blog Talk. I was kind of having a hard time with the description. Wasn't allowing me to put everything that I need to put in there, but I will get that. So that's discount-paper-supply.com, and it also has everything solar. So Please subscribe to Documentary Radio as well. And we're also going to be upping the Patreon page, putting everything up on there. And that way our rights to our material will be saved and able to support everything that's going on out there. So we really do appreciate the support of everyone. But tonight we want to get into stopping the black violence. As you know, stopping black violence has been a really, really, really horrible thing, difficult thing here in North America, especially in the States. And stopping it in its tracks, it will take a new approach. And that new approach will change the lives of black Americans and everybody in North America forever, right? The question is the population of the copper-colored people of North America ready for this kind of change? And what kind of change would that be? Well, we know back in the 1960s, black people and black activists, especially one formerly known as H. Rap Brown, you remember him, he once said that violence is as American as cherry pie. And starting in 1919, even way before then, there's been major waves of national uprisings. And especially here in the 20th century, this one here that's happening now will have to be the last if these copper-colored people in North America that people call black or African American are going to really receive any kind of true relief and be respected on this planet. It will have to be the last uprising. But now we must not only look at the past, but we also must look at the future and a new way of leadership that must be developed. We have to develop a new way of leadership. Extremely important. The old leadership and the old concepts, even though we are really getting out there and we're really doing a lot of good things in terms of teaching and training, that is a great part of everything that needs to be done, but we do need to have a new development of a new type of leadership, not this old leadership that is based on a different type of hypocrisy, as I would say, that would keep the people in its current position forever if it has been allowed, right? So a new type of understanding on how the so-called black community is going to stop the black violence in its tracks. And you have to have a brand new type of concept, a concept that has to go back to the past and redevelop what was once there and bring it here into the future, which is our present, and making sure that this new but old paradigm that must be recreated, it's done in a way as to where it will actually not only make sense, not only is doable, but is plausible. And one of the things that I've been helping to be working on is something that we're going to be reading out today on how. So I've been getting a lot of calls and emails about talk a little bit more about co-creation communities, talk a little bit more about the indigenous nations of North America and how every single one of these fit into the quote-unquote black African American paradigm and changing its leadership and bringing us to a place where we can actually be free and have a chance to be able to work on our inner being and being outside of the system. So that is the first thing that I do really want to talk about, is that nothing within the system that we're in now is going to be able to help support anything that the so-called black, so-called African American is going to achieve or wants to achieve. It's not designed to support it. And we have to understand that there are many different, how can I say, actions that we must take. Many different actions that we must take in order for us to be able to pull out of the current situation that we're in, that we've been stuck in now for over, I would say, have to say almost 400 years, um, it, changing in various different ways to what we have right now. But as you can see, from the 50s, 60s, nothing has really changed because the 40s, 20s, 10s, etc. Nothing has really changed in terms of the attitude of the system towards the quote-unquote Black American. So the first thing you must understand about the Black American, about the African American, is that back in the 1900s, 1800s, 1600s, there was no such thing. No such thing as a Black American, no such thing as an African American. They were either called Indian, indigenous. They were also called a term which is relatively new in the world scene through these anthropologists, Negro, Negroids, right? American Negroids. But the definition in 1828 dictionary that many of you probably already heard is the definition of an American Indian. And the definition of an American Indian is the indigenous copper-colored beings that were first found here when the Europeans arrived. That now apply to the children of Europe. And George Washington says that it must be held in great esteem or whatever. But the definition of an American Indian is the copper-colored people of this land, right? So the copper-colored people of this land is actually the Black African Americans. Now, within that population, you also have to make another distinction, because within that distinction, there are a lot of what you'd call Huguenots who have blended themselves in to the American Indian diaspora communities, and they have come to a point as to where they blended themselves in so well that you can't really tell each of them apart. Now, these people are actually from the land of the first Ethiopia, what you now call Africa. So you have to understand that these are the first type of people, and we're going to be having a show on that one too, how to tell the difference between the Huguenots, Moors, and the American Indians, right? It's extremely important for you to understand that, right? Because if you don't understand that, you go back into the parable of what Jesus said about the wheat and the tares, right? Because they are mixed in. So how do you know that some of these people are mixed in with you? It's because your group, your organization would never prosper beyond the point that it is now, and then it will automatically or ultimately collapse in somewhere or another. Not against any churches or anything else like that, but the church, NAACP, Urban League, all of these organizations, Black Lives Matter, none of these organizations were started by indigenous people. They were started by someone that was outside of your race that gave you the answer to your problem. So that is the first thing. Identifying who you are, understanding who is mixed in with you, and how to tell the difference. And we'll get into that one. So how do you stop this black violence in its tracks? Which is extremely important because, as you know, since the death of George Floyd, which again was a whole nother story in itself, there's been over, I think, some odd 1,100 people in America that have been killed by government forces. On average, there's about, anywhere between 1,000 to almost 2,000 people. When I say people, copper-colored beings, copper-colored people, as you know them as Black or African Americans, killed by government forces every single year. And then you have the thousands of people that are being killed on black crime inside of their own communities, as well as people that are being killed by people outside of their communities, whether they're being hung, shot in the middle of the street, people who consider themselves to be government forces but are civilians. and causing it. Even for myself, I really don't want to go out jogging anywhere with all this lockdown stuff. You know what I mean? Because a lot of the parks and stuff like that were closed. You don't want to go out there jogging because you never know if you're going to get shot or not. And that's terrible situation. But that's the truth, and that's what every reality is. And this is the reason why we're having this conversation today, because stopping this black violence in its tracks means stopping the violence against the copper-colored people that are indigenous to this land, right? Not just the Huguenots, the Moors, or the others that assume the names of Ebus that have no attachment to this land, right? So, in order for us to be able to do something like this, you must get into making sure that you develop cohesive units of attachments. And what do I mean by that? Meaning that there has to be a confederation developed between all of the indigenous or copper-colored organizations within North America. And one of the things I call it is many flags, one nation, many flags. And the reason why you call it confederation is because confederation is one of the things where no organization has to compromise itself. So I was also asked to break down what is a confederation, what is a federation. Is the United States a confederation? Is it a federation? What are states' rights and all those other kinds of things. But held by member states in a confederation, the federal government is accountable to the member states. So there is a federal government when you talk about a confederation. And this is something that has to be developed within the Aboriginal, Indigenous, American Indian, copper-colored being community, right? In a confederation, the federal government is accountable for the member states, who are the ultimate authority held by the federal government. In a federation, the federal government will hold the ultimate authority, and the member states will be subordinate. So Canada is like a federation. The United States started out as a confederation. Member states, they all got together and turned into a confederacy, or constitutional republic, right? Giving the federal government a little bit more power. So this is the reason why we call, when we're developing all these things, we're calling it a confederacy. So a confederation must be developed. And what would this confederation look like? It would look like co-creation communities, different nations, some people call them tribes, all around the country coming together and for a common purpose, putting up a centralized council in order for them to be able to represent the larger whole of the Confederation. This council is a council where they come together so that they can agree to do a big thing for the whole entire populace of the people. And that's what has to happen. Back in the Black Power movement, you always heard this thing: unity, unity, unity. Well, this goes more than unity. You have to have organization. Without organization, you have absolutely nothing. You have absolutely nothing. And if you have nothing, and you just have a collection of people, you'll get what you've always gotten, which is the dependency of you depending on a government that doesn't care about you, which is the government that put you in the situation to begin with, which got its authority through the Papal Bull back in 1451, called the Doctrine of Discovery. And as they switched off from Britain, France, Spain, and many other countries all around the world, including ones in Africa, what you now call Africa, is how this constitutional republic, this enterprise, this business, this corporation, has taken over the lives of every single copper-colored Aboriginal, American Indian, indigenous to this land. So you have to look at yourself differently now, right? The so-called black people in America, the so-called African American that are actually indigenous, and not of a Huguenot nature, or even a Moor nature, Huguenot, Moor, sometimes, a lot of times it is interchangeable, including a Hebrewistic type nature, because it all depends. Again, if you're not an indigenous Hebrew and you have your ties over in another land, you are not an indigenous Hebrew of the Americas. You have assumed the identity of the original beings that are of a Hebrewian type people, but do not belong here on this land. So you cannot conclude or include yourself into the American Indian or indigenous population. So what you're having now, and again, I'm going through this because you have to be able to discern the difference between yourself and other people who look like you, who are mixing in with you, but do not have your best interests at heart. And how do you know that? You know that because the organization that you're in is not truly trying to get you to be free. They're trying to get you deeper into a system that they had agreed originally a long time ago to be a part of. You are not a part of the system, never been a part of the system. You're not a citizen of any state either. You're a citizen under the Constitution of the United States, under a federal type situation. So it's important for us to understand, especially the people around the world and the so-called black people, African Americans in the United States, where they actually stand. All right, because if you are an indigenous American, a copper-colored being, as it states in the 1828 dictionary, and as a lot of historians have originally classified you, then you have a right through the decolonization process and through the 1968 or the 60 Civil Rights Act as an American Indian to pursue your own particular educational, health, governmental, land authority to govern yourselves, right? You have a right to self-determination by United States law, by the universal laws of the UN, by this system. And this system does not require you to be a part of it unless you give up your rights to your own freedom. And if you're calling yourself anything other than a copper-colored being, American Indian, indigenous American Indian, or an indigenous being of this land, Aboriginal is a term that has recently come up in the 1800s, taken by two words out of the Roman language, Abba, original, meaning person original to the land, right? So that's a fairly recent terminology. So it's not an old enough terminology for you to be able to use as a designation. Legally around the world, it's indigenous. So that's why I always use the word indigenous, because in their system, that's a legal terminology that they can identify with. So that's what you are, indigenous American Indian, right? You're not swarthy, and when we get into the actual classification and breakdown of the Great Reset, we will get into the differences between the people and what happened to the original people and who came in to try to take their place or throw them off their own land, right? You also get into the North Carolinian slave trade, which wasn't trading Africans; they were trading American Indians, indigenous American Indians, meaning copper-colored people, meaning the ancestry of the majority of what you now call black or African Americans. So, what has to be developed, and what is developed right now, is what would be called Articles of Confederation. Articles of Confederation. And it would have to be established in an agreement in a conference, a legislature type of situation where every group around the country would have a representative. And in this thing, so you would have set-up meetings that would go on, and in these set-up meetings, we would come to an agreement that every group, co-creation community, nation. There's a lot of what you call tribes out there, and you know my feelings about tribes. I don't believe that you're tribal. I don't think we ever were tribal. I think we were. I believe in all the studies that I've done that we were civilization people. So when you say tribe, you know, close families, whatever the situation may be, doesn't really matter. What matters is that you are a cohesive unit. Doesn't matter how small or even how large you are. Right? A lot of people go for, we got to have thousands and thousands of people in these tribes or in these co-creation communities. You need enough in order for you to be able to get together, have security. And the reason why we started the co-creation communities is exactly for what's going on right now, so that you would have a place to be able to go and be safe. Right? You don't have to worry about all these vaccinations. You don't have to worry about all these shots. You don't even have to worry about all these flus, because you'll automatically be in a situation as to where all the stuff around the world can't get to you. That's what a co-creation community is all about. It's about safety. It's about education. It's about training. It's about having self-worth, about having self-love, about training your children up in a way as to where they can actually have dignity about themselves. Remember, you are not slaves. Your people are prisoners of war. And not only were your people prisoners of war, but they were the ones that had created civilizations, a civilization that was rivaled by no other on this planet. Here in North America, there's more mounds in North America and more pyramids in the Americas, period, than any other place on the planet. The oldest pyramids are here in the Americas. The oldest mounds are here in North America. We are the oldest group of people on the face of the earth, and that's proven by archaeological records and by historians themselves. So when you read that, there's a lot of good things into that. But we have to have an Article of Confederation, and this confederation has to have a name, right? And, you know, this confederation that we're talking about shall be known as the Indigenous Nations of North America. It's non-assuming, and that means that it's just a confederation that anybody can be a part of. Anybody can be a part of. The Articles of Confederation and perpetual union between the Indigenous Nations of North America and the separate but equal of the copper-colored beings, and the reestablishment of nations within North America. And why do I say the reestablishment of nations? The reestablishment of nations because we must reestablish, come to agreement to reestablish what was here before they came. Now, before who came? That's a loaded question, and we won't answer that question now, but I'm just going to say before they came. So this is how it would sound as the article, as we begin to start reading what the article is all about. And again, you have to have these things in this system in order for them to recognize you as a cohesive unit, in order for you to be able to advocate for your people, whether it be for monetary funds, medical supplies, resources, land, anything. If you want to be taken serious by anybody, you have to have a few things in place in order for this system to be able to recognize with you. So we must create a system in order to deal with their system. But before we can create a United Nations of the system, we have to be able to get ourselves out of it. So this is one of the first steps, right? So This is how it would sound. Articles of Confederation, and then you will have the date of that Article of Confederation when it was passed, right? To all to whom these presents shall come, we, the undersigned delegates. And again, the delegates are the people from each and every nation, co-creation, organization, that are out there representing our copper-colored people, whether they are nations themselves, Confederates themselves, whatever they are, tribes, whatever they are, they have a right to be represented amongst all of the people because we are all the same, right? So to all to whom these presents shall come, we, the undersigned, delegates of the indigenous nations affixed to our names, send greetings. Articles of Confederation and perpetual union between the indigenous nations of North America and the Alliance. And then you will have all of the names that are going to be representing the indigenous nations of North America. And again, it could be the Great Confederation, it could be whatever the name is going to be. Once we have this established, we can begin to start saying whatever you want to say. And that's what that's all about. So I'm just going to read off some names, right? So the Article of Confederation and the Perpetual Union of the Indigenous Nations of North America, Indigenous Alliance, Nation of the Great Plains Alliance, Nation of the Great Basins Alliance, and the Chickasaw Nation, Floridian Nation, Alabama Nation, Delaware, Confederacy, Choctaw Nation, Indigenous Contingency of Florida, the Creek Nation, the Old Indigenous Federation of Olmecs, the Aboriginals of the Southeast Carolinian Nation, the Choctaw Nations of Georgia, the Indigenous Nations of the Cali, and so on, right? Names seen here have signed or under the negotiation. Many other names are not included at this time. So there will be a lot of people who are going to be coming in, and they're going to be adding the names to the list. And the longer that name gets, the more people we're going to be representing. And the more people that we're representing, the more power that we have as beings of people, because now we can actually go to governmental agencies and begin to start having representation for ourselves. Right? So this is done because what they're doing in their system is that they are putting out a plan and putting in leadership that will govern you, even though they're not your leaders, and then begin to start giving you reparations as that made-up, created story as slaves. That's about for all those around the world that understand that. There's a lot that's going on within the indigenous nations of North America, or the copper-colored people of North America, where they are actually prisoners of war and forced into labor camps, right? And a whole lot of other things that were going on at that particular time, especially along with a lot of the people that they considered to be Moors, etc. So we'll get into that at another time, right? So each nation must vote in their own legislature, right, and have it passed, and a delegate of their own choosing signs in representation of their agreement for their nation. So what that means is that when they get the Articles of Confederation, they go back to their co-creation community, they go back to their nations, they go back to their organizations, they go back to their tribes, and they talk about joining. They talk about coming in and being part of a confederation. Now, again, remember, confederation is a very loose structure of people agreeing to come together for a purpose. That purpose is to move forward an agenda that is going to help the copper-colored people of the Americas to become free, independent, and to be able to live on their land free of harassment, free of pain, free of death, free of economic enslavement, free of anything that's going to cause them to be a part of this system that was designated to try to genocide them off the face of the earth. So that's what this is all about, right? So every co-creation community, every nation, etc., will have in their own right. I call it a legislature. They will get together. They'll have a meeting, a conference. They will vote on it. They will vote on what they want to see happen, and then they will come back. All the representatives will come back, and we'll have another conference. That conference will begin to start laying the foundation of what the Confederation is going to be organized for. So, and then a date for the signing of the agreement to this form, this reestablishment of government, because that will also reestablish us on this land and make us a force to be reckoned with in order for them to be able to say, okay, this is what we want for our people. It's very important that every nation, big or small, have a chance to join with the indigenous nations of North America, right? And why is that? Because this confederation is not about one, but about protecting all of us. And the document is to help set up the federal branch and executive, the forming of the development once the document has been formally signed and executed. The Congress or the Confederation Council in full will be formed by the representative nations, and a date will be set for a national election, right? The reestablished Congress or the reestablished Council or United Nations and the executive officers will be responsible for resetting up all governmental affairs in a whole. So it's very important that, because this gets into setting up education department, housing, all kinds of stuff. And where the housing comes in at, again, part of this is taking over every single Section 8 apartment complex housing unit, no matter where it is in America, and making sure that it's given back to the American Indians in order for us to have a place to live. Each and every single one of those things would be co-creation communities in places where you can set up your quote-unquote tribal affairs, right? So this is very important because none of this will be able to happen unless we have a cohesive engagement, right? So each indigenous nation retains its sovereignty, freedom, and independence, and every power, jurisdiction, and right, which is not by this confederation, especially delegated by the indigenous nations of North America in this assembly, right, or in the assembly of the other, whatever you want to call it, Congress, United Nations, Council, right? Some people call it Grand Council, Great Grand Council, right? So then the federation will be named, whatever the name is, and right now the generic name is the Confederation. The Confederation shall be known as Indigenous Nations of North America of the copper-colored people of this land, right? And that's where you get the acronyms of INA, right? So that's Article 1. Article 2 is that each nation retains. So now you have all the articles, and these articles will begin to start allowing you to know exactly what the rights are, right? So Article 1 gives out the name, right? The name will be the Indigenous Nations of North America, the copper-colored people, the Indigenous Nations of United Nations. Whatever the name is going to be would be Article 1. Article 2, each indigenous nation retains its sovereignty, freedom, independence, and every power, jurisdiction, and right, which is not by this confederation, especially delegated to the indigenous nations of North America, INA, or the United Nations, whatever it's going to be called, in Congress assembled, right? Article 3, the said indigenous nations hereby respectfully enter into a firm league of friendship with each other for the common defense and security of their liberties and their mutual and general welfare, binding themselves to assist each other against all forces offered to or attacks made upon them or any of them on account of religion, sovereignty, trade, or pretense whatever. Article 4, the better to secure the perpetual mutual friendship and intercourse among the people of the different said indigenous nations is this union. The free inhabitants of each of these indigenous nations, whether you call them paupers, vagabonds, fugitive from justice, accepted, shall be entitled to all privileges and immunities of a free indigenous nations person. So whoever's coming in from the outside and being accepted into your co-creation community, nation, organization, confederation, whatever, will be looked upon as somebody who's a part of your land, right? A part of your being, right? And several indigenous nations, right? So, and the people of each indigenous nations shall be free, egress, and regress to and from any other indigenous nations, meaning that we would have free travel amongst each other, right? Free travel amongst each other. So it is now giving you jurisdiction of a land upon which you are to control, take care of, commerce, etc., right? And shall enjoy therein all of the privilege of trade, commerce, subject to the same duties, impositions, and restrictions as the inhabitants therefore respectively, provided that such restrictions shall not extend as far as prevention of the, let me just go down here, removal of property imported into any indigenous nations, to any other indigenous nations of which the owner is the inhabitant, provided also that no imposition, duties, or restrictions shall be laid by any indigenous nations on the property of the United Indigenous Nations itself or there with them. So these are a lot of legalese terms, but these terms are necessary in order for you to understand nobody's trying to take anything away from you. We are equal and free people. If any person guilty or charged with treason, felon, or other misdemeanors in any indigenous nations shall flee from justice and be found in any of the indigenous nations shall be upon and deemed of the governor or executed power of the indigenous nations from which he fled, be delivered up and removed to the indigenous nations having jurisdiction of this offense. So if there's somebody from your clan, your nation, your co-creation community went over there and robbed somebody, and then, you know, that indigenous nation will take him up, and if there's agreement in place, he can be tried or judged within that indigenous nation, or they would be sent back to the people who have jurisdiction over him. Right? So this is not to be punitive. This is to be able to help people to be able to learn and to be able to give peace and freedom. Right? Article 5, for the most convenient management and general interest of indigenous nations of North America, delegates shall be annually appointed in such a manner as the legislature of the indigenous nations shall direct, to meet in Congress on the first Monday in November every year with a power reserved to each indigenous nation to recall its delegates or any of them at any time within the year, and to send others in their stead for the remainder of that year. No indigenous nation shall be represented in Congress by less than 2 or more than 7 members, and no person shall be capable of being a delegate for more than 3 years in any term of 6 years, nor shall any person being a delegate be capable of holding any office under indigenous nations for which he or another for his benefit receives any salaries, fees, allotments of any kind. Each indigenous nation shall remain its own delegates in meeting in indigenous nations, and while they act as members of the Committee of the Indigenous Nations. In determining questions in the indigenous nations in the Congress or United Nations assembled, each indigenous nation shall have one vote. Freedom of speech and debate in Congress or the United Nations shall not be impeached or questioned in any court or place out of the Congress or out of the United Nations or out of its assembly. And the members of that United Nations or Congress shall, or council, shall be protected in their persons from arrest or imprisonment during the time of their going to and from attendance of Congress, except for treason, felony, and a breach of the peace. That's important because, again, like I told you, there's a lot of people that are mixed in with us that are not with us that are going to be trying to sabotage. So we need to make sure that there are things in place to be able to deal with the people that are trying to wreck and destroy what we are developing, what we have developed. So it's important for us to also, if any of these turncoats or traitors or whatever the situation is, trying to get some of our real people that are in any kind of trouble, that they also be protected, right? Article 6, no indigenous nation without consent or indigenous nations of North America and Congress assemble shall send any embassy to or receive any embassy from or either into any conference, agreements, alliance, or treaties with any king, prince, state, whatever, nor shall any person hold any office of profit for trust under the indigenous nations of North America for any of them except for the present allotment, office, or title of any kind whatsoever from any persons of foreign state, right? So we have to begin to start understanding we're looking at the United States of America as a foreign entity. This is what it's getting into, right? So you have to make a choice. You're either going to serve in their Congress, be a part of their legislature, or you're going to be a part of your own state or your own indigenous nations, right? So what's that doing is making sure that we are going to be what we are going to be. No two or more indigenous nations shall enter into any treaty, confederation, or alliance, whatever, between them, without the consent of the nations of North America and the Congress, especially accurately in the purpose for which the same is to enter into, and how long it shall continue. That's important because you have to make sure that everybody's operating together, right? You don't want anybody operating on their own because we have to speak as one people when we have to make sure that every single person is being treated equally and fairly inside of this United Nations that we're developing. Again, this doesn't control what you're doing with your own co-creation community, but what it does do, it creates conformity, so then that way we will be able to lay down rights for every single person that is a part of the nation. So, you are, once you become within our borders, you are protected from anything that is from without, right? Protection zones shall be outlined by the indigenous nations of North America and the Congress assemble, allowing for areas within the governmental boundaries and or outside the government boundaries to be declared protection zones. This will allow the Executive Council of the indigenous nations to provide aid and security and determined by the indigenous nations or the United Nations Congress or Council assembled. The protection zones will have a right to ask for the right of entry to the Confederation after 2 years to be voted on in Congress or the United Nations and ratified by its assembly members of the nations. Now that's important because what happens is that as we begin to start bringing people in, we have to let them know that this is real, it's serious, and they have to begin to start, going through an education process. understanding who and what they are, making sure that they're not Huguenots just trying to blend themselves in, right? So, it's unfortunate, but, we would love to trust everybody, but because of what we're coming out of and trying to get ourselves to, it's going to be very difficult to say that we're going to be able to trust people because some of these people don't have souls that are going to be able to move us forward in the direction that we really wanted to be going in. So the people of the world, again, when I'm talking about stopping the black violence, how do you stop the black violence? You have to have an organization of confederations around the country of North America in order for them to be able to service their own people properly, right? In this, no indigenous nation shall lay any imports, duties, taxes, whatever, which may interfere with the stipulations and treaties entered into by the indigenous nations of North America and the United Nations assembled, right, with any other state outside our jurisdiction in pursuance to the treaties already proposed by the United Nations. Now, that's important because you can't, in order for you, see what's happening right now with the quote-unquote people of the United of North America is everybody's acting on their own behalf. So you got a billion people acting on their own behalf, and you got a billion things not happening, right? And nobody taking you seriously, right? So the only way that people around this system that we're trying to get out of will take you seriously is if we begin to start putting ourselves in a situation as to where we can actually really put in a system that is respected by ourselves first, and then that system can be respected by other people. No vessel of war shall be kept up in times of peace by the indigenous nations, except such only shall be deemed necessary by the indigenous nations of North America Congress assembled for the defense such as the indigenous nations. Now, what's going on with that, what we're talking about is that we're operating in a soulful manner. So what we're doing when we're negotiating with these people, we want to make sure that somebody's not going to go out there like Antifa is doing with the Black Lives Matter and start breaking up all kinds of stuff and giving us the wrong impressions about what's going on. Right? And that's something that we don't need. So this is how we keep everything under the one umbrella. And if we're going to be making a move, we're going to be making a move together, which is an agreed move. So the reason why all of this is really important, is because we want to make sure that these articles, which is 7, 8, and 9, I believe it is, which deal with war and the war powers and all that other type stuff. The reason why that's important is because we need to know and have an understanding of how we're going to be protecting ourselves. The main way we're going to be protecting ourselves is through education. Education, and then healing, programs, economics. There should be nobody who's a part of this United Nations Council, the indigenous nations, that should be considered to be of a poor state. Everyone should be rich. And I'm not talking about some sort of socialist thing. I'm talking about this. Everybody should be rich. Everybody should have more than what they need to be able to survive on this earth. They should have more than adequate, decent housing. They should have more than adequate, decent food. They shouldn't be having all the GMOs. They should have more than adequate medical until medical isn't nearly needed that much anymore. They should have more than adequate way of being able to hear their souls and getting the information, more than adequate education, which I talked about that in another show, how the universities are open, and these universities need to be intertwined into a cohesive unit so that we can really get the true history of our people, what we are called, right? So it's important for us to act as one. So, when you talk about the Congress, or the United Nations, they'll have the sole power of being able to say, who we like and who we don't like, who when we do businesses, who we don't want to do business with, etc. But the most important thing is in making sure that we are able to cohesively bring in a program of taking back every single housing authority. Every single housing authority council should be the councils of the co-creation council. Every co-creation council should be the council of the housing authority. It shouldn't be the housing authority of the people that are there that don't belong to the people that it naturally belongs to. The housing authority should be, if you're a nation, your nation should have developed the housing authority council. They should be running the housing authority. A tribe should have a tribal housing authority council running the housing authority. So therefore, when that's happening, that will grant us access to not only Section 8, but also Section 3, which should also grant us a lot of different types of jobs. So in order for us to be able to stop the violence in our communities, we need to have a framework. And this is the beginning and development of the framework, which is developing now, in order for us to go out there to do what we need to do. So then that way we will be able to bring proper, true education and training to our people and begin to start separating them from the Huguenots that are out there hustling in the streets and killing people, right? If that's who they want to be, that's who they want to be. If you're an indigenous person and you want to be part of that Huguenot race or that Huguenot sort of type people, part of the world type system, then, so be it. Go do what you got to do. But if you want to stop, if you do want to stop the killings, then a cohesive plan must be in place. And this is the reason why the Articles of Confederation were developed, was developed back in 2017, and why there was a lot of smaller organizations that came together. Some of them I read and helped develop the whole entire series of this, right? So every nation and member institution shall abide by the determination of the indigenous nations of North America and Congress assembled on all questions by the confederations or submitted to them, and the Articles of Confederation shall be inwardly observed by every nation, because every nation is having a part in this educational system, in this development process of bringing us back to our own. So in that way, we don't have to fight with each other. We don't have to have wars. And we get the drugs out of our communities, right? We'll get these pimps and all these other people who don't mean us any good. We'll weed them out of our communities, right? And then we'll begin to start sharing resources amongst ourselves. We'll begin to start developing industries amongst ourselves. And then we'll begin to start developing and strengthening our own economic system, political system, to the point as to where we're back where we were before, where it was a very loose type political system and people are just free, right? Because we really do care about ourselves. And, it's important, whereas I'll read this last part to you, and whereas it has pleased the grand architects of the universe to incline the hearts of the legislatures we respectively represent in this United Nations, or Great Grand Council, whatever you want to call it, to approve of and to authorize us to ratify this said Articles of Confederation, Perpetual Union, known to all we, the undersigned delegates, by virtue of the power of the authority to give to us given for that purpose, do by these presents in the name and in the behalf of our respective consuits fully and entirely ratify and confirm each and every of the said articles of Confederation of the Perpetual Union, and all singular and matters, things therein continued. And we do further solemnly plight and engage the faith of our respective constituents, that they shall abide by the determinations of the indigenous nations of North America and the United Nations assembled on all questions which by said confederations are submitted to them, and that the articles therefore shall solemnly be inavoidably observed by the nations we respectively represent, and that the Union shall be perpetual. And the witness whereof we have hereunto set our hands in this United Nations, and then we'll place a date and everybody will sign, and that's one of the things that need to happen in order for us to stop this black violence in its tracks. You want to keep on seeing people dying left and right, you keep them in the system that's killing them. We need to get them out of the system. We need to develop our co-creation communities. Nations have already been developed. We need to come together under one voice and move ourselves forward. It is a scary thing because I know a lot of people don't want to lose a lot of their power, and nobody's going to lose anything. That's the reason why we meet as a collective unit, and as a collective unit, we meet and we have our agreements hammered out, set in stone, moving forward in a protective, in a particular format, right? So what would this accomplish? What would this really accomplish? Well, this will give us, they talk about reparations, right? Reparations owed to us are more than $20 trillion, right? But right now, even if we got, let's say, $900 billion, there is nothing that is in place right now for the colored people of North America to be able to disseminate the money that needs to be disseminated in a way where it's going to actually help the people that it's for. There's no apparatus. This gives us an apparatus. This gives us a purpose. This gives us a way of being able to get the money to the people that need it. We will be able to take over our any American Indian apartment complex, which is called Section 8, as according to the 1968 Civil Rights Amendments. We also will have an apparatus of being able to place our people in a protective environment. We'll also have an apparatus to be able to begin to start sorting out those who want to be or indigenous beings or American Indians, learning their heritage, education, and giving them a right to be able to learn how to govern themselves in a respectful manner. So then once you know who you are and what you're worth, life is totally different. See, there's a lot of people who want out of this place, but kill themselves, whatever the situation, because they feel like they don't belong and they don't. Because the system that we're in is unnatural to your being a people. It's just completely 100% unnatural. And it's important. It's important because we really, really need to have something in place. And this confederation that has been developed, this confederation, it's happening right now all across North America. And so I want the people of the world to know, and also those in other lands also know that, soon when this really does take hold, because it's coming together, that we would be able to be in a position to be able to represent ourselves and then move forward out of the disgrace that we now find ourselves in. This is Ronnie McLean for Dark Matter Radio, and, this is probably the last chance that we have to stop the violence in America, to stop the black violence in America, to stop the violence against the Aboriginal indigenous, copper-colored American Indians, as it's so stated and defined by the 1928 American Dictionary here in North America. This is what we need to do. This is what we need to do. So I'll have these articles of confederations. A lot of people do have them already. Put them up on the website. Right now, the website is up. I'll have that down in the link. So take a look for that. And so when you want to talk to somebody about, what should we do, what can we do? Well, developing a confederation, coming together as a United Nations people under one umbrella, and then submitting ourselves to the world with goals that are doable, that are reasonable, that are achievable. And this is what we're going for. This is what we're happy. We don't have to fight anybody. We just move into our being and be what we're supposed to be. Right? That's what it is. So hope this show gave you a little bit more of an understanding as to where we're headed, where we probably are going to have to head in order for things to be right. You first must be able to define yourself. Those who aren't black, African Americans, Huguenots, or Moors, or even certain types of Hebrews, because a lot of the American Indians do have a Hebrewian type background. It's spread all over the world. But those who don't belong to any other land that belong here in North America or the Americas need to be able to join the indigenous nations of North America and get underneath that umbrella so that we will be able to fly our flags and our symbols and come together as one. That's what we need to do. So then that way we can save the lives of these indigenous beings, these American Indians that are being slaughtered out there in the streets. We can save the lives of our people who are being destroyed and decimated in the education system. We can save the lives of a lot of our men, our indigenous American Indian men, and even women who are out there working and slaving in the system that is meant for you to be 100% broke all the time and owing a lot of money to a Federal Reserve System that can never, ever, ever be repaid. And we're at a time right now where we have the window opened up big time. And if we vastly, as a collective, and quickly assemble ourselves as a confederation, we have more than enough time to be able to do what the ancients are waiting for us to do, and that is to come together and show the world who we truly are. The indigenous American Indians, copper-colored peoples of the Americas. This is Ronnie McLean for Dark Matter Radio. Great Grand Rising to us all.
Predicting your behavior with an absolute accuracy has been Google's quest for 2 decades. If they can do that, they can generate endless streams of money from advertisers and anyone else who is
You've been listening to Dark Matter Radio with your host, Ronnie McLean.